I actually came in a few hours early because it takes a while to heat this up. um, oh well. If we continue to be in these size numbers, we'll go back in there where we can be more close to one another. But for a while there, we were a little too big, and I'm not going to rush back and then rush back out here each. So we'll go at this for a little bit, but we'll see what happens. Tonight, we're going to do two things. We're going to start with a companion movie. This is a really, really excellent presentation. I'm not going to show the whole thing, but I really like you to pay attention to the beginning story. It's really amazing, and we're going to watch about 19 minutes of this at the beginning, and then I have a lesson ready to go. But I built this in, and I think it'll be helpful. And maybe we'll stop and see if there's any questions before I go to the lesson after this, but we'll view this for now.
My grandfather was a Christian pastor in Germany. He always said he was born on the wrong side of the ocean at the wrong time of history. He was drafted into the German army along with every able-bodied person right as the Second World War began in 1939, and immediately placed on a frontline unit, Unit 699, that was placed in the heart of Russia and moving through the Ukraine and into Russia in the southern flank. They were heading for the city of Baku, for their goal was to basically capture the oil reserves of the Russian armies and the Russian government. And being on a bridge building unit right at the front lines, often behind enemy lines, there were huge amounts of casualties and a lot of heartache. One day, his commanding officer towards the end of the war called him into his office, his makeshift office, and asked him a very direct question. He said, "Herr Hasel, do you believe that Germany is going to win this war?" And the question was kind of a catch-22, because if you're a patriotic soldier, you're going to say, of course we're going to win this war. But also being a Bible student and as pastor and having studied prophecy, my grandfather knew that Germany would not win the war, and so he was conflicted and he didn't know exactly what to say, and at that moment he said a silent prayer to heaven. And then he said, "Is this an official or an unofficial question?" And they had kind of an unwritten code within their unit that when they had their hats off, they could speak on an unofficial capacity. And so the commanding officer stopped for a moment, and then he said, "Okay, it's unofficial." And he took off his hat and placed it on his desk, and my grandfather did the same. And he pulled out a Bible from his pocket, opened it up to Daniel chapter 2, and began to tell the story of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And he said, "I don't believe that Hitler is correct. His empire cannot last 1,000 years as he's promising the German people. This war has to fail because of biblical prophecy and how everything has been fulfilled in the past."
Nearly 2,500 years ago, King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had a dream. Now, it's been said that this dream revealed the history of Earth from that time until today. Now, is this actually true? In order to find out, we need to go back to the book of Daniel.
Daniel was taken captive about 605 BC. According to the book, he was taken captive right about the beginning of the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar II, who established the resurgence of Babylon as a very strong power in the ancient Near East. He took a number of princes from the city of Jerusalem captive, one of whom was Daniel.
It was not unusual that conquerors, kings who conquered the land, would take from royal families and nobility young people and take them with them to their own country. And it was mainly done for two reasons. One reason is that these young people will be educated of Babylonians, but they will accept culture and religion and everything from Babylon.
They would take the cream of the crop, the intelligentsia, the royalty. They would take the artisans, the writers, the physicians, so that their land was developed at a high level. But they would leave some of the people in the land and allow a local person to rule. That's exactly what happened with the time of Daniel. Daniel and his friends were taken from Jerusalem to Babylonia.
We find Daniel captive in Babylon. Now, Daniel chapter 1 tells us why he's there. Okay? Nebuchadnezzar had gone to Jerusalem in 3 separate raids.
The first one was in 605 BC. Then there was another one around 598 BC and another one around 586 BC. Each time the penalty against the people of Jerusalem was a little bit more severe. It may have been in that initial attack in 605 when Daniel and his friends, princes of the kingdom, were taken into captivity with the idea of training them and making them sympathetic supporters of the Babylonian crown.
This piece chronicles events from 605 to 594 BC, including Nebuchadnezzar's campaign in Palestine and the first capture of Jerusalem.
Daniel was probably brought back to Babylon on the first raid by Nebuchadnezzar. He comes to Babylon, and he is enrolled in the schools of the Babylonians. He's given a Babylonian name. He's fed Babylonian food. He is enrolled in their schools in a kind of Babylonian brainwashing to prepare him to assimilate to Babylonian culture and language, and eventually to be a kind of puppet ruler over the Jews for the Babylonian Empire.
He risked his life by insisting on remaining pure in the way that he ate in his diet and so on, and what he drank, rather than just accepting the hospitality of the king. Now that was extraordinarily dangerous. And if you don't accept the hospitality, that is a serious insult. Now you see, that can be dangerous even if you're equals with somebody. But Daniel was not the equal with Nebuchadnezzar. He was a captive. He was being treated with a massive blessing and compliment from the king, the great king who had conquered all these other kingdoms. And yet he refused his hospitality. This was very dangerous. But God blessed him. He got through that, and he became much wiser than all of the other wise men.
One of the most fascinating stories in the Bible is the story of Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar has dreams, the Bible says. It was his second year of his reign, and he wakes up completely disturbed because he's had this amazing dream, and like something that happens to so many of us, he wakes up and he doesn't remember what he dreamed. He
dreamt a dream that terrified the daylights out of him. Now, this has got to be quite a dream to terrify this kind of a king. He knows it, but it still frightens him. He doesn't know what it means. Obviously, to him, as many other people in the Near East thought, as well as Pharaoh in the book of Genesis, he thought this had something to do with him and his future and his kingdom, but he didn't know what. And what's more, in the morning he had that impression, but he forgot what the details of the dream were, so he couldn't even remember it.
It's fascinating. When you look at archaeological evidence, tablets that have been dug up from 6th century Babylon, we find that dreams were a common part of Babylonian existence, particularly among the priestly class, among the elite class. There was a whole school of how to deal with dreams. They had books on how to interpret and define dreams. So that description of the king having a dream and having someone come in to interpret it fits right in with the 6th century context.
The greatest attested genre of Babylonian literature that we have is divination literature, omens, like that. In other words, what I'm saying is that if you took all of the Babylonian written materials that we have and you put them all together in a library, the biggest section would be this one.
Babylon is steeped in religious meaning, connotations, overtones, undertones. And that's the world that Daniel lived in. And this is the context in which Nebuchadnezzar had this dream. He was filled, his life was filled with symbolism. And so for him to have received a dream that was so symbolic would have really meant something significant to him. He would have realized this is more than just a strange dream. It has meaning.
If a dream was not interpreted, it was perceived as dangerous, or it was perceived as a curse. That's why people had to fight for finding the interpretation of the dream.
So therefore he called all of his wise men who were supposed to deal with dreams and visions and interpreting them and omens and divination and all that stuff. And they were the ones who knew about the gods and how to get in touch with them. So he calls them all together. For some reason, Daniel wasn't there. We don't know exactly why. Maybe they just neglected to call him because he's a young colleague of the rest of them. We don't know. Maybe there was some politicking going on. Maybe some of the others were jealous and didn't want to call him. All right, so Nebuchadnezzar has all of these people, and he says, all right, I've had this dream, and I want you to tell me the interpretation. So they say, oh, that's fine. We're in that business. Tell us the dream. Oh, no. I don't remember the dream. You're going to tell me what the dream is.
And he goes so far as to say, I have decided firmly, if you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble.
He is demanding of these wise men that they tell the king the content of the dream. And they get upset. They know they're going to die if they don't do this. And so they're really working hard against this. And you know what they do? They say, as it says there in Daniel 2:44, he says, now wait a minute, king. They're fighting for their lives now. There is no king on earth that would ever ask such a difficult question.
The king basically says, I'm not going to be persuaded by your time-saving tactics. Okay? If you tell me what the dream is, then I can have confidence in your interpretation. I don't remember what the dream was, and that's what I need you to do for me. After all, you're the magicians, you're the astrologers, you're the soothsayers. Tell me the dream. They were paid, they were enrolled, they were on the divine payroll for the purpose of knowing what others didn't know. They had access to secret information, and so it was reasonable for the king to ask this.
And so the king decides that he's going to have them all killed. All of his top advisors, all of his magicians, astrologers, his sorcerers, his enchanters. And the story or the decree comes to Daniel and his 3 friends.
And they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Now, Daniel, as we've already said, had gone through the schooling of the Babylonians. And so he was apparently numbered with the wise men. He was numbered with those that were being killed. As the story unfolds, one of the king's guards arrives at Daniel's house for the purpose of executing him. That must have been awkward, right? Knock, knock, knock. Hello, what can I do for you? Daniel? Yes, I'm here to kill you. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree from the king so urgent? What's going on here? Why all the haste? Why all of the urgency? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. He must have said something like, well, listen, the king's had a dream. He can't remember the dream, but he knows it's important. He has an anxiety associated with this dream. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation.
Instead of fearing for their lives, they decide to have a prayer time together. And Daniel asks, and his friends ask, that the Lord would give them not only the interpretation of the dream, but the dream as well.
And so the first word of verse 19, then the secret was revealed. What do you mean then? Well, after he prayed, after he asked. So Daniel at this point is rushed into the presence of the king.
And then Daniel explains to the king the dream. It's interesting, though, what Daniel says at the beginning. He says to the king, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about it, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come.
I can just imagine when Daniel came in and the king said with surprise, can you tell me the content of my dream? And Daniel said, I cannot tell you the dream because of my wisdom, but there's a God who reveals secrets. And the king was listening because that sounds good, but he hadn't heard the content of the dream yet.
Because remember, the king doesn't recall the dream, But you can be sure that if he starts to hear it, you know how that is when you can't quite remember something and someone says, oh, is it this, is it this? Oh, yeah, that's it. Okay? So he's waiting with bated breath. What will the dream be?
And then Daniel said, O king. Yes, the king said, that's right, I'm king. O king, you looked and saw. Yes, I saw. Now what did I see? I can just see the king leaning forward in his chair. And then Daniel says, O king, you saw an image. And as soon as Daniel had uttered that one word, image, he had won the day.
Verse 31. You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, and its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So here he describes a great metal man, okay? The head of gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of bronze, the legs of iron, and the feet partly of iron and partly of clay, okay? Very simple. A statue, an image, an idol.
So you see descending value in terms of the metals, but perhaps increasing strength, except for the iron and clay at the bottom. So it's a very intriguing dream, and the context of Daniel suggests that in the 6th century, Daniel was shown a vision of the entire future of the world from Nebuchadnezzar's time until this stone kingdom, which seems to be something that happens at the very end of Earth's history.
But he goes on to explain not only what the king dreamed, this image with a head of gold and arms and chest of silver and thighs of brass and bronze and legs of iron and feet of iron mixed with clay, but he goes on to tell the king what those things represent.
Verse 37. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand, and he has made you ruler over them all. Now look at these words here. You are this head of gold. Okay? No need to wonder, no need to question, no need to guess. Daniel says it. You, Nebuchadnezzar, and by extension, the kingdom that you represent, Babylon, you are this head of gold.
After, of course, consulting his own God, he's told that these metals represent a sequence of various kingdoms, and Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar that you, O king, are this head of gold. The head of gold represents Babylon.
And it's very appropriate that that be the symbol for Babylon, which was gilded in gold, famous for its gold.
Babylon was one of the most spectacular cities of the ancient world. If you look at the size of Babylon, it was larger than Rome, larger than Athens. It was just an enormous city that was situated just about 25 miles south of Baghdad in modern Iraq.
Historians tell us that there was more gold in Babylon, and probably they're using hyperbole, but you can get a feel for the richness of ancient Babylon, that there was more gold in Babylon than there was dust. It was the great golden kingdom of antiquity.
Excavations that have taken place there beginning in 1899 by the Germans have revealed a city that was surrounded by triple walls.
The walls of Babylon consisted of actually two systems of walls. And they surrounded the city, and these two systems, each one consisted of 3 separate walls. So you had a total of 6 walls surrounding the whole city. It was massive.
This brick is actually a brick from the walls of Babylon. Every brick made during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar was stamped with his name in it.
There were over 200 pagan temples. The famous ziggurat, of course, was the central temple, and many gods were worshipped. Nebuchadnezzar built many altars, temples, sanctuaries, and it was a very polytheistic society, a very sophisticated society. The literature and the language was something that at that time The Akkadian language was basically the lingua franca of the world, like English is today. Anyone doing commerce, anyone doing any kind of diplomatic relations would be communicating in that language. And so the Babylonian Empire not only spread, but it was very influential as well.
Nebuchadnezzar didn't like the idea that he was only the head of gold. He wanted.
Well, that should sort of bring you up to date, sort of a review of what you've heard so far. And I like the great visual effects in that. There's some great visual. Did you get the load of that brick with his name on it? Every brick in the city, and you saw the size of the city, was bigger than Rome, and Rome had 1 million people in it. Every brick had his name on it, and much of it was covered in gold. So it's no wonder it was called the Golden City. Imagine the fortification. 3 sets of walls, or 2 sets of walls with 3 walls within the walls. They were fortified. They were undefeatable. He was, like Hitler, believing that he was going to have a 1,000-year reign. So can you imagine that in the midst of that, after just at the apex of his career, the Babylon has now spread, and I'll show you a picture in a minute of the map, but it has spread all through Mesopotamia, has surpassed Assyria, has gone up across the desert into Jordan, Lebanon, the old ancient island of Tyre, coming down into Israel toward Egypt, all under his domain, brought all the gold and wealth from all of those other countries in, brought all their gods in. He's got all of this, and he's sitting in his strength and power, and he's fine. His dad is dead. He's finally king. He's got all these people at his service, everything at his beck and call, and now he has a dream that's very disturbing, and he wants the dream told to him, and that's where we're picking up. Is Daniel is before the king. Remember, nobody else could explain it. And now Daniel said, we saw it last week, there's no man on earth, and this isn't about me, no glory to me. This is about the God in heaven. There is a God in heaven, and he reveals secrets. And what I'm about to share is a revelation from him. Now, number one, he says it there, he's just dissed this man's God, because he has a number of gods he worships. There's 250 temples. Imagine, 250 temples, and each of those temples represent different gods. They're very, and he's saying there is one God that you need to pay attention to. So this is, isn't he a brave 18-year-old guy or 20-year-old man? So brave in that situation. Okay, so we're picking up there. But as I'm passing these out, you got one? Grab one there. As I'm passing these out, throw questions or comments at me, and I'll glad you can pass that down that row. I'll gladly field anything right now before we get started. Janet, here you go. Just one, yeah. You can have 2 if you like, but it's kind of repetitious. Is there 2 there for you guys? Okay, great. Hi. How are you? Good. No? We will pray for her. Roy, Lord bless you. Hi, sister. Good to see you. You like our cold weather? Yeah. I've forgotten your name. Essie. Everyone, this is Essie. She's her 3rd week here with us. It's nice to have her with us. Lord bless you. Are you guys good? Oh, that's last week, so you're ready for... You managed to get a copy of last week's lesson before you left, Suzanne? How's that coffee?
Delicious. You're a great coffee maker.
Oh, wow. I'll pass that on to Lilla that Harvey said my coffee was okay. Oh, delicious. You can even eat the dishes. Okay, so you'll notice, oh, I didn't get a copy up to my good pastor friend in the booth. Sorry, Jeff. Thank you. So you'll notice it's color-coded. We're going to do the interpretation of the dream tonight. So your majesty looked before, you stood on a large statue, an enormous dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. Ahead of the statue was pure gold. Its chest and arms were silver. Its belly and thighs were bronze. Its legs of iron, and then its feet were partly iron and partly clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, not by human hands. It struck the statue on the feet, and iron and clay smashed them. And then the iron and clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became chaff on the threshing floor. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, when in modern day combines, we don't need threshing phones, but when the grain is picked up, it goes up into the combine, and the seed, whether it's barley or oats or whatever, that goes into a bag and is stored, and then out the other end comes the chaff. That's just like the outside leaves, the outside of the kernel gets thrown away. And so that's what happens in the summer. The wind swept them away with the leaving a trace. So these, and if you look at modern day, that beautiful city that you were seeing images of with the great walls and the huge, at the time, the largest tower in the world, the Tower of Babel, and all those, because Nebuchadnezzar rebuilt it, and all of the hanging gardens, it was the most gorgeous city in the world. Modern, you go there today, it would be like going on a vacation. It would be an incredible. Imagine the rivers running through it, the Tigris and the Euphrates running through this city. It was just an absolutely beautiful city, made of gold, best that man could do. And now, if you went there, it's just dust and just rubble. Same thing for all of these that we will look at. Even the Roman Colosseum. I saw someone recently, a friend was there, and pictures of it, and it's just a small piece of it left. The Acropolis at Athens, just a small smidgen of it left. And so, but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. When Christ sets up his kingdom, it will have no end. Now, I want to be clear. The kingdom is already here. It's right here in your heart. It's here. He started the kingdom 2,000 years ago. There's two aspects to the kingdom of God. There's the kingdom of God in the hearts of man. That had to happen first. When Christ came riding in on a donkey. We were talking about this in board meeting last night. Wasn't that cool? That was one of the coolest things Joe Amaral shared. Was when, because Israel was on that trade route between, say, Babylon and Egypt, and there was war back and forth, sometimes armies would march through Israel, but they weren't attacking Israel, or Judah, they were just on their way to attack somebody else. So they had to know, are we at war? Or, do we have to fight? Or are they just traveling through, And so they had this agreement that if the king was coming through and he was on friendly terms and he wasn't at war, he would come riding on a donkey. But when the king was coming for war, he would be on a horse. Isn't that powerful? Because Jesus came riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. But when he comes back to establish his physical kingdom, when he comes back as the stone that's going to destroy all the other kingdoms that ever came before it, he's going to be riding on a horse. That's powerful. And so that kingdom, which has already been established, you see, people are looking for something. You may even be thinking, all of this is about the future. None of this is about the future. The spirit of Antichrist is already at work. The process that's going to lead to the establishment of the false kingdom and lead to the destruction of much of the human race and all of the negative that's going to happen, that's already been happening for thousands of years, and it pops up now and then. The New World Order, the globalization, it's already in progress. The spirit of Antichrist, the spirit of man and arrogance saying there is no God. It's already there. It already exists. And the spirit of the kingdom of God is here in us and in other Christians. And we are looking forward to that coming, but it's already here. So we are making history. We are part of the future. So don't take Daniel just as something that's going to happen in 50 years or 20 years or 10 years. Think of it as something that's unfolding before our very eyes. Even in my lifetime, I've noticed such terrific changes that things that were spoken of in Daniel and Revelation that were very hard to understand are now so much easier to understand because of the technology that we see and the attitudes that we see in our society today. So if you go, and I forgot to number the pages again, sorry about that, but if you turn to the second page, he talks about the dream, and he says, now this was the dream, and now I'm going to interpret it for you, King. So the presentation, the video presentation took us to this point, so now I want to pick up. So verse 37, Your Majesty, you are the King of Kings. Now he's not saying you are the King of Kings, as in God, but you're the king of human kings. You're the apex. See, we believe in evolution. I mean, humans believe in evolution. Don't quote me on that one. And they're saying, well, there's a better king, then a better king, then a better king, then a better king, and eventually we're going to have, and see, that's what the Antichrist will be established as, the best human leader ever. See that? And he's going to eventually say, don't believe in those religions and don't believe in that. Believe in mankind, believe in me. Jesus said, you've seen me, you've seen my Father. Look to God. This guy's going to say, look to me. I am the answer. I am the epitome of best. You take the best of this leader, this leader, this leader, this leader, this leader, this leader, and I'm it. But Daniel says the opposite is true. Nebuchadnezzar was the top. And from then on, it's gone down. And he says, you're that golden king. Your Majesty, you are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion. Now, we have that in our statement of Canada, right? We're the Dominion of Canada. It means that God would have dominion from sea to sea, right? Dominion means to have domain, to have authority. So God, where does Daniel tell Nebuchadnezzar his authority is coming from? The God of heaven. Really important. The God of heaven has given you authority. Where does Nebuchadnezzar think his authority is coming from? Himself and the gods. But Daniel says, no, it's not about you. It's about God. And not the gods, but the God of heaven. This is the same phrase he uses to say, it's not about me, not another human being could tell me this, but the God of heaven who reveals secrets. Remember that? So he really uses that phrase. He has given you might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind, and the beasts of the field, and the birds of the sky. Now, what does this sound? Does anybody hear something, a verse reminiscent of another verse in this verse? Thank you, Kim. Genesis. That's right. What did God say? And you will have dominion over the beasts of the earth and over the sea. And here he is saying, this is you. God has given you this kind of Adamic power, this first man, this alpha male power over all the earth. He has placed this in your hands, and wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. Now, can you just feel Nebuchadnezzar's head swelling? Oh, man, I love, what these kings loved when they had their ego stroked. And he's stroking his ego. At the same time, he's telling them, you didn't do this. There's a God in heaven who put you here. Remember the check. But he's still liking what he's hearing. You are the head of gold. Now, even then, what was the city made of? Gold. Even then, gold was considered the most precious metal in the world. Even then, gold was considered the most precious. Why is gold considered the most precious metal in the world? It's not the strongest. It's the rarest and the purest. It is rare and pure. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard one person say that all the gold in all the world that's ever been mined, now you get gold with all kinds of impurities in it, but if you take that, and the beautiful thing about gold is that when you heat it up, it doesn't burn up, it melts away, right? And so that when they refine gold, and the Bible talks about God refining us as gold, what's he do? He turns the heat on. He turns the fire on. We say, Lord, send the fire just now. What are you asking for? God to turn the fire. What's going to follow? All the impurities are going to be lost, and you're going to come forth as pure gold. And the purer the gold, the more rare it is, right? So you have carat levels of gold. And I understand that the purest forms of gold are transparent. And so the streets of gold in the Bible are transparent. Heard that. But I've heard that if you took all the gold that's been mined in the world, and that's been a lot of mining done, and it's all refined, that it would not be more than the obelisk in the in the Washington Monument. It would not build more than that, all the gold in the world. Now, I don't know how accurate that is, because that seems like a very little amount of gold when you consider Fort Knox and all the gold that's on people's rings and so on. I don't know, but it's supposed to be very, very rare when you actually have all the other metals removed from it. But in those days it was rare, but yet it was plastered all over Babylon. And so very significant that Nebuchadnezzar is the gold head. And many leaders and even empires have come and gone since that time, but he remains the archetype, the tyrannical, narcissistic leader that have followed in his wake. When Daniel announces to him that he's the head, he not only refers to him personally, but this huge empire that he's over. And we've already pointed out that the city had existed for thousands of years before this, because that's where Nimrod had built the Tower of Babel and God had dispersed the people. But the city had been destroyed and rebuilt a few times. but now it was at its zenith, and now Babylon was at its peak. And this is the first time it could be considered a true empire. His dominion stretched from the Gulf of Hormuz right over to the Mediterranean. Just complete dominion. So there's a map, shows that bright orange would give you, if you can see, it basically covers modern Middle East. As you see from the map, it was a vast area that he controlled, and I'm going to name some of the countries that would be under that rule today if it was a modern day map. Kuwait, Iraq, some of Iran, some of Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. And much of the middle areas, which, like if you see in the middle, that was just barren, inhabitable land, which would be now Jordan and eastern Iraq. There were Bedouins even then. It was just all desert, and there weren't many cities or anything. It was just sand dunes. The metals of the image are significant as well. So they begin with gold and they end with iron and clay. And this demonstrates that they begin with more wealthy and rare. That should be they become less wealthy. So as you move down through the empires that come on this earth, they become less rare and wealthy, but they increase in strength and durability. One would think that this position of the head of gold would come as a great compliment to the king. But what we can see in the chapter 3, you've read ahead, what does the king do in chapter 3? He builds a statue of himself, and does he make a head of gold? Yes. But is the rest all gold? Yes. It's almost like an act of rebellion. I'm not just the head of gold, I'm all gold. And there isn't a whole lot of other places. I'm never going to lose my head. I'm not just the head, I'm the whole thing. And you're going to worship me. And so he rebels against this. But at first, it's kind of like Pharaoh. Pharaoh would hear Moses and he would repent and soften up and say, you can let the people go, and then he'd sleep on it and say, not letting the people go. And that's kind of like what happens here. The king, his immediate reaction is one of penitence and bowing down to Daniel and say, wow, you're right on, and I want to worship this God. But within a few days, he's doing the opposite. He's worshiping himself and demanding everybody else does. So his pride can't grasp his own mortality, and later portrays himself as a complete statue of gold to be worshipped. And so this is what I want to emphasize. You'll hear me saying this over and over again in the next few weeks. This is the spirit of Antichrist. The spirit of Antichrist is against God, against the Christ, against the Messiah, lifts man up and says, I can do it myself. We even have this in ourselves. Sometimes we think it's a good thing, a spirit of independence. I can do it. We see it in 2-year-olds. Now, I do. Well, and we say, oh, that's great. They're a strong kid. Well, it could be. Or it could be an attitude of, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to take care of number one. I'm not going to humble myself and admit that I need help, or I'm proud. What goes before a fall? Pride. What does God say? Humble yourself in the sight of God, and in due time he'll exalt you. So the spirit of Antichrist is all about exaltation, lifting up. Remember? Lucifer, 7 I wills. What's he come to Adam and Eve? Oh, on that day you will be exalted. What's the Tower of Babel about? Oh, we don't need God to protect us from the flood. If he sends a flood, we'll just be on the top of the tower. We don't need an ark. We don't need an ark of safety. We'll just be on the top of the tower. He won't be able to drown us. What an attitude. That's what we live on. That's what we live in today. An attitude that says, you know what? The sooner we realize that we don't need a God to depend on, that's a big problem. Marx said, God and religion is the opium, the narcotic of the masses. It's the drug of the masses. Their religion, they worship, and they think, oh, God's going to save us. Oh, cry out to God. He'll save you. He said, the sooner we get rid of that attitude and smarten up and stop going outside and thinking there's some divine being going to save us, and start looking after ourselves here on earth and begin as humans to take control of our own destiny, the sooner we're going to fix the problems, the sooner we're going to have peace. Where's that gotten us? Well, Marxism led to the development of the Soviet Union. And what did they do? Did they all get together and live in a commune and sing Kumbaya and everybody? No, it led to totalitarianism and Stalin, which Stalin was very, very much like Nebuchadnezzar, very, very much like the Caesars of Rome. He killed millions of people, even his own son, to keep control because they become paranoid. Because it's one of the things that happens with the spirit of Antichrist, is this whole idea of corruption and pride and self-exaltation, and then a fear that somebody else is going to try to do to them what they did to others. And so they have to just keep killing and protecting and killing and protecting and creating secrecy and protection. And so there it is. Everything you can see, in every bad form of government, every form of human government is wrapped up in Nebuchadnezzar, because he's the head. He's the one that started the whole thing. And you can see the handprint of Satan in it, and how it's blinded people. But don't worry if you don't understand everything tonight, or it's feels like I'm not going into enough detail, because there are more images, there are more visions and dreams that will detail this out. So tonight we're making broad sketches, okay? Just so you don't feel like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to, I don't want you to give up. Don't give up and go, I don't get it, okay? Don't, it's not coming together for me. Don't do that, okay? Because it will, as we're just getting started, really, in chapter 2. So the emphasis of Daniel's message can't be missed. That God is doing this. It's not Nebuchadnezzar. The Lord's raised him up and given him dominion. Why? That was a baseball swing. I can do a golf swing. Why? I'm sorry. For God's purpose. Does everybody agree with Kimberly? It's God's purpose. God has raised him up for his purposes. Now, this may leave you with a question. What would the question be? What's the purpose? Why? Why would God use an evil person? Why would God raise up such an evil person? This guy is evil. You're going to see in the next chapter. Well, we just saw. He just said, you interpret my dream. Well, that's impossible. We can't interpret your dream because you don't tell us what the dream is. We'll interpret it. We'll fake it at least. No, I'm not telling you what I dreamed. Off with your heads. I'm killing you all, and I'm going to turn your houses into powder. That's the kind of guy that God's raised up. But God raised him up for a purpose. One of those purposes was to make sure Israel understood what had God been warning Israel for hundreds of years now. That's right. You're my people. You love me. You serve me. You're different. You stand out. I've set you apart. I've made you different. I love you, and I want you to be special. I want you to be blessed. None of these diseases will come near you, and you're going to be special, right? Does that sound like he says to us? You're my child. I love you. You're going to be special. I've taken away your sin. You don't have to be bound by that addiction anymore. You don't have to be bound by that fear anymore. You don't have to worry about being found out anymore. I'm taking it all away. I'm washing you clean. You're brand new. Amen? You're born again. You have had a fresh start. Now follow me. And he says, don't be like Israel, that when I set them free and became their God, they turned back to the world and turned to the other gods and said, no, we don't want that. We want what the world has. And he said, I warned them and warned them and warned them and warned them. There was Jeremiah, there was Isaiah, there was Micah, there was Hosea, there was Hezekiah, there was dozens of prophets who warned and warned and warned. And finally God said, okay, you're going to be scattered. And you know the psalm, by the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down. And there they were, scattered, crying to go back to their homeland, crying to go back to Israel, crying to go back. And God was wanting to put that in their hearts. And eventually, after Daniel, they repent, and there's a time of restoration, and a time, but then there's a time of falling away again, and a time of restoration. And that's to teach us lessons too as Christians, right? Because so we get away from God, and what happens? The enemy gets a foothold, and we go into a time of exile. We feel away from God. We feel that I used to be so full of the joy of the Lord and the love of the Lord. I used to sit down and enjoy the Lord, and now I was just feeling this coldness. Did God move? It's a funny story, and maybe it's a bit outdated now because we have seat belts and we don't do what we used to do. But when you used to date, you used to sit close together in the car. And the husband and wife were talking one day, and she said, I don't feel like we're close anymore. And when we drive in the car, I used to sit right over there beside you. And he said, well, I haven't moved. That's because he was driving. And God hasn't moved. God hasn't moved. His love for you is the same. His intensity for you is the same. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever, right? But often we feel that exile, that drift. And he wants us to. I always say this to God. Never, please, Lord, in your mercy, never let me get in a position where I don't feel convicted for my sin, where I don't feel troubled for being away from you. That's scary. If you're in a place and you get to a place and you say, you know, I used to do this and it used to bother me because I felt it was a sin and it was wrong and I felt away from God. Now I can do it and God doesn't even bother me with it. I must be maturing as a Christian. I'm stronger now. I'm wiser now. I'm not that weak little young Christian I used to be. I'm a mature Christian. Who's telling you that? Look what I did. I went right up on my tiptoes. I must be 5'6" when I do this. I'm just like way up there, you know, because I'm exalting me. I'm that. No. We become callous. We become hardened in our hearts, and God's conviction is not there. So if there's things that we used to bother us, we used to see with our eyes, and it used to bother us, and now it doesn't bother, things we used to hear, and we would say, oh, don't talk to me, don't gossip in my ears, it hurts my ears, it's not right. And now we like, oh, tell me something juicy, I need to hear that. Then we can say, God, bring us back to that place where we're convicted by the simplest of sins. Amen? Make me pure gold. I don't want to be gold with iron mixed in and gold with brass mixed in and gold with copper mixed in and gold with stone mixed in. I want to be pure gold. I want to be pure because that's what he died for. That's what his blood was shed for. That's why he gave himself up, was to make us pure gold and to separate us from that world. And when we start moving over toward the world and away from him and we're comfortable there, I say, God, in your conviction, come by your power. Come in your mercy. Come in your love for us and draw us back. Do what you did to Israel. Make your word true. He warned and warned and warned. What